kick this off and frame the discussion. The purpose of this call is to get clarity and finality about grant budget numbers for folks for this fiscal year. And let me get started by offering an apology to all of you that are program managers and grant makers in the organization from me, and also on behalf of our team for some of the confusion that took place over the last couple of weeks as we tried to get you accurate information. So what happened here was you got information that got this budget information going that was technically accurate but misleading and confusing. Dan, there's an echo there. Is that just my phone, or is that yours too?
No, actually, if folks could take it off the speaker, that's what's causing this feedback. If you're able to just pick up the handset, that would remove the echo.
Okay. So to put it in simpler terms that maybe all of us can understand, because it took a little bit for even me as CEO and for us as a senior management team to get on top of all that had happened here. But if you look at your paycheck and you see in one box of your paycheck there's gross pay, and then there's another box at the bottom or somewhere else that says net pay. And you know by now that when you see that number in the box that says gross pay, that's not how much money you get. It's technically accurate, but you know that's not how much money you get because you got all the deductions and taxes and everything else. And that your real number that ends up in your checking account is lower than that gross figure. Well, that's sort of what happened here. We gave you a number that was technically correct from an awards budget standpoint, and Dan's going to march you through all this. But it was really misleading and functionally inaccurate because it didn't amount to the number that you have to deploy and spend and make grants on this year. So we should have done a better job of understanding that information and managing it better. Wasn't just Dan's fault. All of us in the senior management team saw that number when it went out, before it went out. We didn't press enough to get clarity about it by the time it got to you. So that was just our bad as a senior team, and we didn't serve you well when that happened. So I just want to make that first point is just an apology for some of the confusion here. The second point I wanted to make is the dollars look lower, but the only reason that the dollar is really lower as it goes out to communities in terms of grants is the 3-year averaging issue, which Dan is going to take you through. But basically, we do 5% of our net assets in grant making each year. And the way we get to that number is something called 3-year averaging, where we take the average of our assets over a 3-year period, and that becomes the targeted spending number for the year. That number is lower. So in fact, we have, outside of ACA, so I'm putting ACA special allocation aside for a minute, the non-ACA grant-making budget is in fact lower as a result of the 3-year averaging. And the reason why we do 3-year averaging is to protect ourselves against wild swings in the stock market from year to year. Okay. And so Dan will share with you how that number to begin with was a bit lower, and we don't have as much money to provide in non-ACA grants this year as we have in the last couple of years. But the community, outside of that, the community did not lose money in this particular clarifying of the grants budget you have for this year. What ended up happening was, and Dan will explain this further, we spent money faster. We went through our cash faster than we ever have before. And the reason we did that, which is point number 3, is we're making too many single-year grants. And Dan will explain this as well. It's nobody's fault, but it's something that happened as an unintended consequence of how we've been moving ahead with our grant budgeting, and we have to figure out a way to get back to multi-year grants, or a portion of multi-year grants, to serve the community better. But we spent money faster than we typically do, and we fell behind the 8 ball in sort of managing it. So the community didn't lose money as a result of that exercise. They just got it out faster than we anticipated, which left us with less money to spend in this current year.
Hey, Bob, sorry to interrupt. Just want to ask the group, if you're on a speakerphone, please push the mute button. That may help us get rid of some of this echoing.
And guys, this is Ben. I'm so sorry to jump in. The problem is actually being caused by someone who is listening on their computer and haven't muted themselves on the computer. So the audio is coming back from to their camera.
And we didn't catch all that, but it sounded like you said somebody's listening through the computer. If you are doing that, just please close out and dial into the audio conference. Thanks.
Okay, I hope, is that better now?
And we're still getting a little bit of it. It's okay, Bob.
Okay, so those are the 3 points. Apologies for the confusion. We won't let that happen again. The information was technically correct but misleading. No money was taken from the community in this process. The dollars are a bit lower because of the 3-year averaging issue. And then finally, we're in a place where we're making a substantial proportion of 1-year grants. We've moved away from multi-year grants, and we need to reset the course back towards multi-year grants, but we're not asking you to fix that right away. If it takes us a couple of 3 years to get there on making more multi-year grants, that's fine. And so I'm going to hand this over to Dan just to give you some more exact and precise sense of what happened and what the numbers now mean.
At all.
Okay, thanks, Bob. All right, so everybody hopefully sees my screen, the budget update, where that echo is horrible.
Hey, Dan.
Hey.
This is Sarah. Somebody is not on mute because I can hear them talking, and it's a female voice. So everybody should check their mute.
Yeah, please mute, folks. It's almost impossible to, maybe I can do this.
The conference is now in presentation mode. Your line is muted. All participants are now unmuted.
Try it again. That might have helped, but let's try. I'll continue on. Okay, so as Bob mentioned, we are reverting back to the cash basis. You know, folks, I want to just try one thing.
The conference is now in presentation mode. Your line is muted. All participants are now unmuted.
Okay. Sorry about the technical difficulties. We'll get through this. What we're doing is reverting back to the cash basis for managing grants budgets. There's really 2 primary reasons for this. As Bob covered a lot of this, so I won't repeat, but basically we can't afford the awards basis of budgeting. We had that in place last year. It was misunderstood. It led to an overspend of cash above and beyond what we could afford on our cash target. And as Bob mentioned, we have also this desire to return to multi-year grant making, which everybody seems to agree is the right thing to do, and was something that was brought to the surface last year as part of the Policy and Procedures Work Group. But explaining a little bit more of this, but before I want to answer a couple of things, address a couple of things. First of all, budgets are not being cut. The amount of cash, as Bob mentioned, that TCE pays out to the community is unchanged. We have not turned our backs on the community, as I've heard. This is merely a matter of having a larger carry forward of cash from last year than we expected, which just means there's less available to spend on current year grants. And that little box at the bottom hopefully makes sense. It summarizes for you that we planned on a certain level of encumbrances, but we ended up with about $25 million more than that plan, which leaves that much less available to spend on current year grant making. It's about 20% of the current year cash on grants this year. In terms of total cash, it's something less than that, about 16-17%. But that is essentially the issue, those top two lines. The total amount being paid does not change. The other thing just to address, again, Bob touched on this, is that, why does it seem like there's just less money to go around? Our budgets seem tighter than they have before when the stock market is doing so well. And the answer to that is it has to do with a 3-year averaging. Our cash budget is determined by the 3-year average assets, and that, despite current good news, that 3-year average has actually declined 18% over the last 3 years. Here's a chart that shows that. That bars represent our actual, our corpus, our total asset values, and you can see how we had that big spike and just before the economic collapse in 2008, and then we've built back up somewhat since then. 3-year average assets, though, are measured in the blue line, which smooths out to some extent that the peaks and valleys. But we're at a point now where that 3-year average has declined. Here's fiscal year 11. The average for those 3 years was $3.9 billion, which went into determining the payout targets for fiscal year 11. For 12, it had dropped to 3.6, 3.2, 3.2 this year. So if you look at this year's average versus where it was 3 years ago, it's a decline of 18%. So that is unfortunately what has just added and compounded to this problem of just not having enough, as much as we're used to in our budgeting. Here's the cash budget, just the actual numbers that we've been able to afford to spend every year. So for last year it was 162. So if you take that 162 and we have $28 million needed for admin and interest expense, that leaves us 134 for grants and DCAs. This is cash out the door. Last year, as you know, we converted to an awards basis of budgeting, and that took that 134 down at the bottom, scheduled payments, the amount of cash we could afford, and then worked backwards from that. Available cash was 134. We considered our grant mix, which is the ratio of single-year and multi-year grants, and using fiscal year 12's actuals, that was about 52%, which is lower actually than it had been before. That determines how much you can afford in terms of awards. In the dollar value of grants needed to generate $134 million in scheduled payments. Then, as Bob mentioned, fiscal 13 is the year where the percentage of multi-year grants fell to unprecedented levels. We dropped from 52% to 37%, which is far lower than you can see we've done historically. So working back to the original assumption, 52% became 37%, and suddenly $160 million in grants actually represented about $160 million in cash, which is our $25 million issue. This is the amount we've carried forward. So just showing that visually here. We ended the year last